if there's anybody I watch that's a success as far as like the schools go, you know, it's like all love the break free and what they do and how they go about it and stuff. But Soul, like on his own, without like the brand recognition or like, you know, like Moy is a household breaking name. Like, you know what I mean? Like without that, like Soul is doing that.
Now, let's get off the breaking just for a second, because you know Detroit is an interesting city, right? Just the history. So you know, circa 1950s, it's the like richest city in America. Fast forward to 2013, the city is bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
I come in 2021, and I notice that definitely there's been a revitalization project with the downtown area, but it isn't quite yet reaching the neighborhoods, right? Not all of them, at least. From what I saw and what people were saying, it's kind of like
Charles Bowles is 86 years old. He'd been living in his Detroit apartment for 12 years until the building was bought by new owners, and he was told his rent would go up by $300. Major players like Quicken Loans founder Dan Gilbert are investing in Detroit with huge development plans. Business is booming now, but rents are rising because of it, and it's forcing native Detroiters out of their homes. The city's getting better, but for who? Charles Bowles has called Detroit home for his entire life. He learned how to play piano at just 5 years old, and from there, a decades-long career in music took off. He traveled the world and played with a ton of musicians.
I work with people like Dinah Washington, Little Esther, Etta James, Etta Jones, B.B. King, but I was very blessed musically.
Despite all the traveling, Charles has always called Detroit home.
I was here during the bad times, and I was here during the so-called good times. I won't call them good times because Detroit was a very racist place back in the 40s. Despite all that, I still loved being here. And I still love Detroit even now.
For the past 12 years, Charles lived in the Jeffersonian apartments, but the building has new owners who plan on upgrading the units and installing a restaurant on the ground floor. And with those renovations comes higher rent.
The new owners immediately started, talking about all this revamping and remodeling and updating, and I could see it coming. I could see the bad news coming.
Downtown gets a lot of attention. I saw people dressed up nice to go out to these different spots, and I was like, wow, okay. They said it was this, that, and the third. I'm not seeing any of that. And then you get to the neighborhoods and you're like, oh, I'm seeing it. And then I didn't make it out to I guess the event was out in the suburbs, but then you have the suburbs, right? So there's like this gap of love from the financials of the city, right? What do you think is the future of Detroit?
Ford. We're the Motor City, and we went from like that not meaning anything other than abandonment to like Ford just bought this train station that's like about a mile and a half away from my house. It's I think Union Square in or is it Union Station? The Union Station over in Chicago, Grand Central in New York, and I'm pretty sure there's one in LA or something like that. Like, I'm thinking bigger cities. Those big giant 1920s, the Untouchables scene and everything, like, big prestigious train stations and stuff like that. That went bankrupt or abandoned in like the 70s, 60s. Like it got built in the 20s-ish, and then it was basically useless by the 70s. And then it just went empty by the 80s, late 80s. And then it stayed empty until 2014 when they bought it. But they're turning it into a tech center, like they're basically, that is the space that's going to be on par with competing with Tesla.
So, Jim, I want to talk about your friendly rivalry, at least on Twitter, with Mr. Elon Musk. I saw that you congratulated him. You were very gracious to congratulate him for being named Times Man of the Year, even though you got Motor Trend Man of the Year. And you said you really set an example for us. Can you catch up and beat Tesla?
Well, the first inning of this 9-inning game is for us to get to 600,000. We think that'll put us in number 2. And then with Tennessee and Kentucky, you know, we really have a chance to get to number 1.
And stuff like that. Like that, they're from work. I work with them a lot too, and stuff like that. Their communities. We've gotten some grants from them and things like that. So like they're constantly talking. Like I'm big in like my neighborhood politics, my neighborhood spaces and stuff like that. As should everybody. Yeah, voting president is important, but like if you ain't involved on local politics, you're never gonna experience any kind of change, or at least feel empowered to see change, because these people are like within your grasp to talk to and have conversations with.
Yeah, you can pull up on the local guys.
Yeah, and they'll know who you are, what you do, what you want. Like, but people don't do that. They're just like, oh, I voted, and why ain't things working? Well, you know, show it to town hall. So I show up to a lot of this stuff, and they talk about like, you know, well, how do we impact like this neighborhood positively? So we talk about like making a tech school that specifically is for students inside of DPS schools around that area, so that way they're getting trained to go to that job, so it's not just getting outsourced from everybody moving here, gentrifying the city even more, things like that. So investing into our local community, local neighborhood with education spaces and tech stuff like that. So yeah, so like that is like the future of like this neighborhood. City-wise, I mean, it's kind of like, I would say on the city side of things, it's changing for the good. I mean, even like some of the stuff that they're doing, they're not like socially conscious of like the historical significance of it. We had this neighborhood called Black Bottom in like the 30s.
Now a desolate, truncated row of industrial buildings, Detroit's Hastings Street was once the heart of Detroit's Paradise Valley, an African-American community that thrived from the 1920s through the 1950s. The neighborhood extended from Jefferson Avenue to Warren, with Hastings Street serving as its commercial spine. As the area's established Jewish population moved north and west, blacks coming from the south looking for industrial jobs in the Motor City moved into the inexpensive wood frame houses that lined Hastings Street. The new residents started many businesses, including drugstores, bakeries, doctor's offices, many which were first for entrepreneurial blacks in segregated Detroit.
You know, Black Bottom was a racially mixed area. A lot of Italians stayed down there, and many black people stayed down there. And I always thought of Black Bottom as being from Gratiot, all along that way, all the way to Shane, and all the way back to Congress.
And it was like one of the richest, like an industrious, like black neighborhoods. And they decided to run a freeway through it. Displaced the whole community, shut down all the businesses by the 50s because freeways and all this was the wave of the future and stuff like that. So it's like we constantly have been shooting ourselves in the foot, relying on the auto industry to like pull us, and then they pulled out of the city and stuff like that. That's why the blight, everybody tries to blame it on like the 67 riots. Like
50 years have passed since the summer of 1967, which saw urban riots in many large cities, including New York, Newark, New Jersey, and Detroit. It is Detroit's violence, however, that is the subject of a new film. Michelle Miller takes us back. And be mindful this story has some language that some may find offensive.
In 100 places, Detroit is afire. 100 square blocks are now under siege. And as you walk through the area, people shout from their homes, "Watch out for the snipers."
It began early one Sunday morning in late July. Police raided an unlicensed bar in a black neighborhood in Detroit. A crowd gathered. Tempers flared.
This is going to happen all over America. It's going to be a hot world, not a hot summer. It's a hot world.
A rock was thrown, and the city became a war zone.
Several hundred rounds squeezed off. Now all of a sudden it's silent. Tense quiet, everybody looking around.
The fires burned for 5 days.
All the black people in the North End rioted and scared all the white people. The white people were gone by then. Like, honestly, like they had pulled their businesses out because the auto industry decided to move to the suburbs because it was cheaper. So it's like, you know, it's like our, you know, the those like corporate entities were like, you know, Chrysler, Ford, and Chevy, GM. There we go. I had to think tears. Yeah, Chrysler, Ford, and GM like decided it was cheaper to operate outside of the city. You know, Ford was always been in like Dearborn, which is just outside of the city, but it's pretty close.
But it's accessible if you lived in the city, though, right? You could still go work there. Okay.
Boom, boom, boom. But Chrysler, they bounced all the way northeast, like 45 minutes, you know, on a freeway northeast. So it made no sense. Like they popped up out there and then developed cities out there. All of that should have been in Detroit, but they moved and they left all of their stuff. And it's not just an assembly plant. You're thinking suppliers. I worked at Ford for a few years. I was like a plant chair for the union and stuff like that. Like I was inside of all of that world for a little bit. And then 2008 recession stuff, got laid off, went back into renovating houses and stuff, the family trade. But yeah, so like, you know, you're talking suppliers who give the parts to make the things in those places. So it's like, there's like, for every plant, there's an industry around it, you know, as far as supplying that plant, drivers, people living around it, restaurants, stuff like that. Like all the Cadillac DeVille or Sevilles were built like a half mile down the street. Wow. Anything. All the Sevilles were built here. So this 4th Street had this beautiful strip of like businesses and restaurants and churches and neighborhoods. And then they pulled out. Cadillac moved north. They moved out of the city, sent it somewhere else.
Right.
Devastated the whole economy because everybody.
I'm about to say that starts that kicks off the decay.
Yep. And so then so you build this restaurant to feed people who are getting off of, you know, the first shift, second shift, third shift, and then third shift goes away. So you got to close down. A month later, you realize you can't stay. There's no point to stay open for midnight because there's nobody to eat because nobody's at the what do you call it? The plant working. So that ends up falling back. And then the plant pulls out. And so now you're like, well, nobody else is here. And then the houses start being abandoned because everybody's like, well, I'm not getting any money for this because we're near an industrial zone. So it's not worth shit. So I'm out. And then the houses start falling into decay. And then the whole community falls apart because there's no infrastructure. So it's just like.
And then, not to cut you off, but don't forget, now schools have to close because they're not getting they run on tax money.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So nobody's paying taxes because nobody's living in these houses, and it just trickles into 2013.
That's Detroit culture, car culture. All the lowriders and all the videos and Cypress Hill and Dre and stuff, those all came off the line out of Detroit, you know?
Wow.
And like
some Detroiter put their hands on that.
Yeah. And then like we were just saying about the music, you know, you go into like Dilla and not even just Dilla, but like a million other people. But like the music's there and it's Detroit music and stuff. I love what Danny Brown said. Like he was like,
for more quality content from Beyond the Cypher with Illskillz, don't forget to press the like and subscribe buttons. Also, feel free to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Beyond the Cypher. Let us know how we're doing down in the comment section. And to make sure you don't miss anything from the channel, smash that notification bell. We appreciate the love and support. Peace. Until the next episode.